Yeah, go.
Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to this DD Hangout show. My name is Gary Middleton from the group networking business at Dimension Data. And I'm joined today by Bruce Taylor and Luke Foster, and I'll do a proper introduction to the two of them in a minute. And really, we're here today to talk about the performance of IT infrastructures, more specifically about the performance of the network infrastructure and how the performance of the network infrastructure assists delivering applications which ultimately help the business and help users to be less frustrated with the infrastructure that they're utilizing. But before we get onto the topic, let me introduce Bruce Taylor. He's the Chief Solutions and Marketing Officer for the networking business at Dimension Data Middle East Africa. Thank you for joining, Bruce.
Thanks, Gary. Hi, everybody.
And I have Luke Foster, who is a Director for Product Management at the IT as a service unit at Dimension Data, and he's based in the US. Welcome, Luke. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. Appreciate it. Hi, everyone.
So just before we get started, I also wanted to mention that if you have any questions, please use the Google Plus event page to type your questions in, and we'll get to them during the course of the session today. But also use the hashtag DD Hangouts, and we'll get to your questions. And if you're catching the recording of the event, continue to send in your feedback and about the event itself, the content. And if you have any questions, use any of the social media channels that Dimension Data has, and we'd certainly do our best to respond to you. So onto the topic of the day today. And we're really talking about optimization, performance optimization of IT infrastructures, and specifically the network. So, why is performance so critical? And it really comes down to being able to do more with less and being able to have more efficient operations. That's ultimately what it comes down to. And I think we can all relate to the experience of having slow performance on your infrastructure. So you click the download, and then you have to go away and get a cup of coffee before you can actually use the document that you've downloaded. Or you're on a video call or a voice call, and the network just simply doesn't give you the performance you expect or need, and you get a very poor performance, and ultimately you're not able to accomplish what you need to accomplish. So from a personal perspective and from a user's perspective, having a good user experience when connecting to applications and using applications for business is critical. And the walkout factor of just simply walking away from infrastructure that doesn't perform is huge. But in addition to that, if you look at running a business, you want to run more transactions more quickly, be able to operate your business far more efficiently and quickly, and that's what good performing infrastructure does for you. And performance is one of the key architecture criteria when putting any kind of system and solution together. Performance is always a key element of it. But if we go beyond that, Bruce, I wanted to bring you into the conversation here, is that there are many challenges that cause poor performance. I mean, would you mind going across a couple of those?
Yeah, sure. Gary, if you look at business in general, there's business and there are market factors that I think drive a lot of the challenges of poor performance across the network. Okay, so if we look at things, for example, like data growth. So data growth over the years has just extrapolated at a huge percentage. So between 25 and 30% compound annual growth within the organization. This has been driven by market factors external and internal to the business. So 5-6 years ago, where people were expecting to see hundreds of gigs of data flowing across their networks, today it's terabytes flowing across their network. The same network that they were operating a couple of years ago is expected to handle the traffic patterns of the modern business and the modern business transactions. So that's one of the sort of the elements that's driving this in the market. One of the other areas that we've seen a lot of is the terminology around webification of applications. So a lot of applications that were specifically green screen type applications in years gone by that were very small footprints on the network themselves are now being made or developed from a web-based based application front end. This is driving a lot more, let's call it chatty type of information across the network. There's a huge increase of traffic now because web applications actually use more bandwidth across the network. So there's another dynamic that is sort of creating this change or this impact on the network. You've got a lot of chatty applications driving a lot more information. The other thing is there's been a lot of convergence happening. So in days of past, a lot of the organizations would have had a separate video network, a separate IP or data network. They may have even split out, if they were an industrial type organization, a separate OT type network, which is operational technology network. But there's been a huge hyperconvergence or convergence of these networks over time, and they're using the exact same physical infrastructure now to do the job of 3 or 4 network layers of the past. So convergence of video, voice, and data traffic has led to a massive increase of up to 60 to 70% on the network itself. If you look at the consolidation that's happening in businesses, data centers, in things like in the cloud, and the massive, we like to refer to it as the east to west traffic happening inside the data center, this is being pushed up to humongous levels at the moment. What's actually happening is the consolidation in the data center is driving a much bigger footprint in the server market space, and that is driving more applications to be transacted in the data center, and obviously that information has got to flow somewhere in the business. Those transactions are flowing outside the network, obviously down to the end user or down to the customer outside of the network and driving huge network traffic. So those are just a couple of things, Gary. I mean, we could probably sit here and unpack about another 5 or 10 of these different items, but as a start, hyperconvergence or convergence on the network, webification, massive data growth, massive consolidation in the back-end infrastructure is driving huge traffic onto the network. That traffic is now sitting and trying to operate across the exact same infrastructure that a lot of organizations, by the way, haven't worried to look at or change over time. So they haven't looked at the base network platform, even though they're improving a lot of the front-end and the back-end processing infrastructure, and this is creating performance issues on their network.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you for that. And so there's the networks that we're seeing in our clients' infrastructures are just under significant pressure because we're expecting more of it. We're just piling more and more on top of those poor networks, and some of them simply aren't able to cope. That's very interesting. Thank you for that. So if we look at the way we look at performance, we've always maintained that an end-to-end view of performance is absolutely critical. From the user accessing an application from some kind of device all the way through the various links in the chain to that application code sitting somewhere on a server. And I think in the old days it was relatively, it was never easy, but relatively simple to improve performance, because then you had a user on a desktop in an environment connecting over a network to the application code that was sitting in the data center on that same premises, and you then accelerated the performance of that application. Now what we're finding is all of the megatrends, like the introduction of cloud, like mobility, like convergence that Bruce spoke through just a while ago, consumerization of IT and bringing your own device. All of these things have meant that the underlying infrastructure have just become so much more sophisticated. And the user could be anywhere on any device, and the application could be anywhere, in the cloud or in a colo somewhere or in a premise, organizational owned data center. So the ability for a CIO to wrap his or her arms around the network performance has become that much more difficult to achieve. Nonetheless, we think an end-to-end performance view is critical in that it means you can take a strategic approach to performance instead of what we see a lot within our client base is they take a very tactical approach. So they have a pain point in a branch and they'll throw a piece of technology at solving that particular problem, or they might have an application that's not scaling well in the data center, so they throw some application delivery at it. And that's good. It comes, it solves a particular problem, but in our view, you need to have take a step back, take a strategic view about performance and manage it with a strategy rather than piecemeal. So that's an interesting approach we're seeing in the market. But when we just going back to what I mentioned earlier about the infrastructure changing, cloud has changed everything. It's impacting every element of IT infrastructures, and when you start talking and reading articles about cloud, one of the big hindrances to actually getting on the cloud is performance. And I think Luke can provide some opinions here on running cloud applications in the cloud and running the performance of those applications, especially in a distributed environment. So Luke, would you mind giving us a few thoughts and your views on that, please?
Yeah, sure, Gary. It's a good point. I think performance is vital. The client cares about it end to end, and cloud, it brings a whole bunch of challenges. I mean, let's just look at the reality, right? I think you talked a little bit about hybrid environments. You've got places data that's going through a bunch of different really silos, and I think it's caused a lot of issues. And I think a lot of the carriers and providers are still working at how do you have one solution where a provider, for instance, can control that performance end to end. Because look at again those silos, right? You've got local access, right? You still have telcos providing local access around the world. You've got the actual speed and performance and security of the internet, right? You're going to use the internet as an access method at some point. The actual location of data centers, right? If you're using a cloud provider, where are their locations, and physically how far are those from your data center if you're an enterprise, for instance? And then once you're on the cloud, what is the whole cloud as the WAN? How does traffic flow between those cloud pops, right? And that piece, it's a lot of providers are still building out their environments, right? And having a true global coverage is still, there's still a lot of work to be done there. So I think, and don't forget security, right? We're talking about network and performance, but security can actually hinder performance because there's a bunch of things you have to do to ensure that data is secure as it's going from one place to another, especially in the cloud. So I think, there's a ton of challenges, and I think what I would say is from an enterprise standpoint, an enterprise really needs to consider consider what their provider is, the complete solution their provider is offering. You can't just trust that everything's going to go well. There's too many pieces and parts. So I think my suggestion would be, if you're an enterprise and you're looking at options, I think you really need to consider the private connectivity options. Again, this kind of goes back to some of those challenges, right? How are you going to connect privately into a cloud, right? And can you do that using services like MPLS, where you can have quality of service, where you can have dedicated lines where you're not stuck on the hope of the internet performance, for instance? How close is your enterprise data center to the provider that you're going to use? Things like site-to-site VPNs, right? Is there a VPN type option to ensure performance and security when you're using the public internet? Because that's going to be cheaper or lower cost, but you sure have to make sure that there's options around security, using that as a connectivity option. And then WAN optimization. This is a big one, I think. How is that provider using? There's a lot of tools out there to speed up data, right? There's hardware, there's software. How is that provider using things like Riverbed? There's things out there that dedupe data to make it go faster from place to place. And I think you really have to ensure that there's some cohesive way of optimizing traffic within the cloud, because otherwise you're going to get to this point where you may have this really high performing MPLS circuit into the cloud, but then everything from there on is stuck in this slow, in this slow performance. So again, how that traffic's optimized from end to end is really key. And for an enterprise, I think the other thing is, where are your apps distributed today, right? You have to think about that with how your provider's giving you that service, providing where their coverage is. But it's not just that, because I think most enterprises would agree that if they don't have distributed apps now, they're going to have them soon. Where are you? Is there a part of the world you plan on going next? You have to think ahead. There is no option to, just look at your situation today. Things are changing so quick. To Bruce's point about the amount of data that is running over networks now, it's doubling every year, kind of thing. And so that's really key. Finally, SLAs. All this is great. If you don't have SLAs around network performance, all the other stuff is just talk. Is there a guarantee that you're going to have the performance that your apps need? And I think, those are just kind of some high level, but I think they're things that as an enterprise, it points out how important the network is, and especially in a cloud environment, to ensure that you're going to get the performance you expect on your apps.
Yeah, thank you, Luke. That's really interesting, because there's, if you're an enterprise looking at potentially moving some applications and workloads into the cloud, and there's a couple key things. The cloud provider that you're talking to, you'd want to know that they've deployed optimization technologies for themselves, that they have a very high performing environment, that there's a very flexible network infrastructure that is an element of the cloud, rather than a consumer grade cloud that don't have those, don't have as big a focus on performance, because ultimately the cloud then becomes an extension of your enterprise environment, and you'd want the same features, functionality, acceleration, capabilities in your cloud as you currently have in your own environment. And that's, I think, it's absolutely critical. So you have to ask some pointed questions to the cloud provider that you're looking at as to whether they've done those things. And step number 2 is, how could we then extend the acceleration technologies between the enterprise and the provider, so that you get the best performance between those things? And there's a whole slew of additional services that the provider can deliver to you. So I think you're spot on. It's a critical area. Any enterprise grade provider that is worth their salt will certainly be building in a whole bunch of performance acceleration and optimization technologies, so that it is enterprise grade. Very
Spot on, Gary. Luke, I mean, if I could add a couple of things in there as well, is a lot of people do forget when they start to extend into the application space outside of their existing environment. They tend to forget the application and the performance of the network to that application and back again. So when we're talking about optimization and making sure that optimization is as crisp as possible, we mustn't forget about elements, for example, like work from anywhere, at any time, on any device, because that's changing the paradigm shift that's actually happening in the market itself. So the ability of the end user to go home, work from a hotel, wherever they are in the world, but still have that exact same experience that they get when they're on the company local area network or wide area network is very, very key. The second element that I think that organizations need to really consider when you move into an application cloud provider is not just the optimization between your organization and the service provider's organization or data center where they are provisioning the cloud-based application service, but they need to think about, a lot of businesses are looking at the risk elements around disaster recovery in the organization, and they may use that same cloud service provider to provide disaster recovery between cloud-based platforms. Now you need to start making sure your provider has the right optimization technology for your transactions when you're starting to take them and duplicate them between multiple different sites. So there's a lot within that simple few statements that we've made over there, but yeah, you definitely need to look in detail and make sure that the performance to the end user on any device, but also at the disaster recovery level, is consistent right across the whole organization.
Superb. Thanks very much, Luke and Bruce. So moving the conversation on just a little bit, we've spoken about the impact of cloud, and we've delved into the technology a little bit here. But beyond that, we see cloud starting to impact client purchasing models. And when you talk to a client, and when we talk cloud, the most used use case is, of course, compute. That the client has a couple of choices. They can buy a server and they can run their application on that, and they could probably rent a server, or they can go to a cloud provider and simply pay consumptively for that compute time in the cloud. And clients are now starting to come to us to say they like that so much. How can we extend that kind of consumptive pricing models to infrastructure and to infrastructure projects? And that's been very difficult to achieve, end to end across all infrastructures, the entire infrastructure stack. But within silos, I think it's absolutely doable. And I think the one area that we are seeing a lot of traction is optimization as a service. And we've started to see some clients specifically requesting that, and we put a lot of work actually into defining what that is and how to deliver it. So Bruce, I know you've been leading a lot of that work for us. Would you mind taking us through the thinking there and what you've done?
Sure, Gary. I mean, just to set the scene a little bit, one of the most difficult things when you start to look at as a service consumptive-based models for most organizations are the assets that you are trying to take into an as-a-service model and the services truly fungible. Now, it might sound like a highly technical term. Not really. It means that can that asset really be shared across multiple parties? Now, the difficult thing from a networking perspective is often when you provision a network to an organization, it's very bespoke. So it fits the solution set for that organization. So that's just some of the nuances that sort of create a bit of difficulty when you start to define an as-a-service model. So when we looked at what we call optimization as a service, we looked at it in multiple components as a business, and we said there's base network performance management that we need to provision or deliver as a service, and then as we move up the stack of optimization as a service, we want to eventually to deliver what we call application performance management as a service. So we've created a model that starts off at what we call our basic level as optimization as a service. Effectively, what that model does is it takes the organization where we apply this model, and it says what size site do you have, and what is the traffic that you want to optimize back into your data center, your cloud provider, or wherever you're provisioning that data from. So the model is quite simple. We look at micro sites, small sites, medium sites, large sites, big campuses, 5,000 plus people, and then big data center sites. When we provision the model is there to be able to simplify the move from CapEx to OpEx for an organization by saying, if you put a small site on and you've got 5 large sites, 7 small sites, 10 campuses, you pay per site for an outcome. So we moved away from we will put this specific type of device down. We will charge you for the hardware. We will charge you for the software, etc., etc. We've moved away from that to say, what is the outcome? What is the desired outcome for an organization? They want a network between their site and between their end users and the end point transaction that is optimized on a day-by-day basis. And really, that's what our optimization as a service does. It takes, for the client, it takes the pain of having to worry about the hardware, the services, the people elements, the hardware elements, the maintenance elements. It simplifies it right down to a simple per-site payment model, and it allows the organizations to experience an outcome-based service of an optimized network on an ongoing basis. Some of the nuances around there are quite key. For an example, is when a lot of organizations deploy optimization technologies in the environment, one of the biggest things that happen is they deploy the technology. Once the technology is deployed, within months it's out of date because they never apply the rigorous nature of the technology services that are required to ensure that optimization is kept up to date. Within weeks of you applying optimization on a network, I can almost guarantee, I've seen it in multiple organizations, that optimization profiling is out of date. And then organizations wonder, well, oh, geez, I've applied this technology and my network now is slower than it was before I applied some of the technology a couple of months ago. So the optimization as a service bundles all of those services into it for the organization. They don't have to worry about anything. They don't have to worry about purchasing the hardware, supporting the hardware, having the profiling done on an ongoing basis. It's all bundled into the as a service type of model. We have a couple of organizations out there, one or two banking organizations, some packaging organizations, IT-based organizations, and engineering-type organizations that have adopted this optimization as a service and are looking at how do they drive it across their businesses. One of the organizations that we have, I can't mention their names, they're not a formal case study, but is driving this right through Africa. So we've got it in over 27 sites right through the continent, and we've seen some great impact on their base services like SAP, to get that transaction from an SAP business transaction as optimized as possible to all the end users right through Africa. So we've seen a lot of good work coming out of the optimization as a service, really something worth looking at. And I think as we move it into the full application performance management, where we can start to dissect the transactions from a business perspective, we'll start to see the whole monitoring and management of business transactions start to take a much more key role in the organization, because it's really about that. The business transactions, what's key to the enterprise, not the technology or the base underlying utility platforms. Those must work. They must operate. They must be optimized as best as possible. How good is that business transaction? How fast is that business transaction? Because that's really what it's about. It's about delivering performance outcomes instead of point-to-point solutions, and that's what our optimization as a service model is there to do.
Wow, fantastic, Bruce. It just strikes me as that you're onto a winner there, and that we're going to get so many more client requests for exactly that. It gives them the outcome, and they're paying consumptively for it. It's a fantastic fantastic way to provide this technology. I think the other thing that I get often asked is when I'm talking to a client about optimization, they say to me, "Hey, we're getting carriage from a service provider." But that same service provider is delivering the optimization for us. And in many ways, my view on that is that's almost like marking your own homework, because on the one hand, you're delivering the carriage and then you're optimizing it at the same time. And our view, again, that breaks the end-to-end model somewhat, because we find the carrier is only able to provide optimization for the WAN piece and not the other areas. So Bruce, what are your views on that?
It's a very interesting question, Gary. So I've done a lot of work and been involved in a lot of carriers. It's not really in the interest, and I'm going to be a little bit controversial here, but it's not really in the interest of the carrier to optimize the network traffic that is transitioning their MPLS as much as possible. And it's not because they're trying to be mean, it's because they make their money by selling bandwidth. So if you're selling bandwidth and you optimize the bandwidth and you get 10-to-1 performance across that bandwidth, that's 10 times less traffic or bandwidth that you need to sell. But the difference is as well is there's very few organizations around the world that have a single carrier service. So if you're dealing with an organization, and I'm not going to mention carriers, but you've got an organization that's using some connect into the UK and some into the United States, maybe some into South America, some into South Africa and Australia, you'll tend to use multiple different carriers. Now, using multiple different carriers, if you can get a consistency of service across multiple different carriers because they're all optimizing their network, so to call. I'd be quite surprised. The need to put an overlay of optimization across those multiple carriers, I think, is quite key, Gary. And you know, you need to do your homework. Really, if you don't do your homework from that perspective, carriers are very good at what they do. They're very good at carrying base information across a network. System integrators are good at what we all do. We're good at making sure that information arrives at the end point in its best possible times as possible. So yeah, it's a mixed mode. Carriers aren't bad. Nobody's saying carriers are bad. Carriers make money by driving as big a pipes as possible. Okay, optimization is there to not reduce the pipe size, to make the transaction across that pipe as efficient as possible. So there's one other thing around that. When you look at the way applications are built, and sometimes the way that their traffic patterns and their transaction patterns go across a network, often, doesn't matter how big the pipe is, the application itself, the speed of that transaction will not be improved unless you optimize that transaction speed. You can throw the biggest bandwidth ever at that application, but if you haven't optimized the actual transaction itself, the speed of the application won't improve with more bandwidth. That's just the second thing that you need to think about quite clearly.
All right, so fantastic. Thank you very, very much. So I'm just going to pull it together, and if you look at our the dimension data approach to this, again, we've spoken about it a couple of times, is taking that end-to-end view, which puts us in a very strong position, you know, to manage or to put solutions in place that are multi-carrier potentially, you know, because we put optimization around the edge. We have a consultative approach, so we don't just come in and drop technology to fix a particular pain point. You know, our consultative approach is, you know, Mr. Client, let's have a look at your environment. Let's understand the infrastructure that you have in place. Let's understand whether you have any current performance challenges that you might be facing. And once we have that level of information, we're then able to replay that with our 30-year heritage and understanding of networks and deep capability with performance engineering. So, you know, to put that something in place for the client that really does deliver end-to-end performance. So again, I mentioned some of our heritage in networking, but we also have strong heritage and investments in cloud. And our ability to bring that together, you know, having feet on the street in country, you know, with deep performance engineering capabilities, together with a cloud that was rated, you know, one of the highest performing cloud, together really does put us in a very different position to many of the other integrators out there. And of course, once the technology is in, it's all about delivering a managed service, and we're able to provide, you know, deep capabilities in the 60 countries we operate in to manage the infrastructure once it's in, either through a managed service contract or some kind of ITO outsourcing construct together with ITAS and cloud offerings. Really makes us a very compelling company to talk to when it comes to performance and improving the operations of the business. So I think we're pretty much at the end of the half hour. Just going to ask for final thoughts. Luke, any final thoughts from you?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Gary. And Bruce has been great. I think, you know, from a cloud standpoint, it's all about hybrid, right? Every enterprise is going to a mix of different services within the cloud. In that scenario, do not take the network lightly. It's key, right? It is the glue to all those hybrid services. And so I think everyone understands that, but I mean, that's really the key as an enterprise, is the network is that glue.
Superb, thank you. Bruce, any final thoughts from you?
I'd just like to leave a bit of a challenging thought to all of our viewers, is your business is only as effective as your network. And what I'm trying to say there as a parting thought is you can transact whatever you want from whatever platform you want, any way you want. But if your network is not optimized and the traffic across that network is not optimized, your end user will not be able to apply the business transactions in the way they were intended.
Brilliant, thanks, Bruce. So I think in conclusion we can say that it's all about performance, and the better the performance, the better the end user experience and the better the operations of the business ultimately. So we'd like to thank everyone for joining the session today. Really appreciate everyone's time. And again, just a quick reminder, please send any thoughts through any of the social media channels that Dimensionator runs, and we endeavor to get back to you as soon as we possibly can. Just a quick one, JJ, any questions that come through whilst we've been on air? No questions. So I'm going to leave it right there. Really appreciate everyone's time. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.